then I said, we gotta get a mic. I sent it to the group, and the minister said, I'm there in the summer.
Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. We are thrilled to welcome Florence Vanderschuren, a Master's in Sustainability Management student at the Kogod School of Business. Florence works at the World Wildlife Fund as a plastics and material science research intern on the private sector engagement team, helping further the organization's connections with sustainability-minded companies around the world.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here both in person and online. I'm excited for everyone to hear today's conversation, and it is my honor to introduce our guest, Carter Roberts. Roberts joined World Wildlife Fund in 2004, and since 2005 has served as president and CEO. He leads WWF's efforts to conserve nature and reduce the most pressing threats to the diversity of life on Earth. He drives WWF's vision to build a future in which people live in harmony with nature. In my months as an intern at World Wildlife Fund, I've had the chance to hear Carter speak a few times, both at general staff meetings and in an intern-facilitated roundtable. Each time, I have been struck by his clarity and ability to bring humble levity to what are some really heavy discussions about the future of our planet. I can tell that he values personal relationships and values a great deal. And I will never forget his story about how sending a message in the wrong group chat earned him the nickname Papa Carter from the Colombian president. I hope Dave has some time to ask him about that later. Roberts advances WWF's mission by bridging partnerships across private, nonprofit, and public sector work, much in the same way that American University and today's co-sponsors do. At American University, sustainability is embedded at every level of the academic experience, from the classroom to events like the one today, and even in our built environment. It is programs like the one today that enable the sharing of ideas and alignment of values that is integral for inspiring lasting positive change. With that, I will hand things to Kogod School of Business Dean Dave Marchick for what is sure to be an engaging conversation with today's game changer in sustainability, Carter Roberts.
Thank you, Florence. Florence is one of our star students. I remember when she looked at Kogod, she'd come from Duke, where she was an engineer, and then she worked for Vail Ski Resorts, where water and sustainability are the key to their future. And I was really thrilled when she came to Kogod, and obviously she's done great things, and now WWF is benefiting from her skills. So thank you for being here, and look forward to a conversation. Well, I'll ask questions for 20 or 25 minutes, and then we'll open up to the audience. So let's start with your path. So you have an unusual path in that you're a business person, you've got an MBA, and you worked in marketing for some of the leading corporations, but then you pivoted to conservation and environment. Well, why did you do that? And was your business background helpful for your leadership?
Thanks, Dave. It's really a pleasure to be here. And thank you for all your good work with us in our plastics program. Yes, I got an MBA. And I did so because I realized just what a force the business world is in the world, not just for creating a value and money, but also for solving problems in the world. And when I got out, I tried to start a company. And this was in 1988. In 1990, it was 2 years later, that my dream was to build a company that would be good for people and good for the environment. And it was going to use this new thing called the internet to enable mothers with newborn children who were trapped at home to go online and order products that were good for their child and good for the planet, and have it delivered to their home.
Okay, seems like a good idea.
Yeah. And the only question, it may have been 10 years too early, but the only question was transportation. And so we started working on a partnership with the leading dry cleaners and laundry cleaners in Boston to deliver the products to mothers with newborn children, because they were delivering cloth diapers and laundry and all kinds of other things. And then we discovered that most of them were owned by an individual named Whitey Bulger. If anybody knows who Whitey Bulger is, you probably wouldn't want to form a partnership with Whitey Bulger, since he ran one of the largest gangs in Boston and had a violent past. And so
he benefited from government subsidized housing for many years as well. But, yeah.
There you go. So my partner came in and said, it's clear this isn't going to work. We haven't figured out transportation. He said, and by the way, I've been interviewing for a job on the side, and I think you'd be better at it than I would. And he said, you should take my place in the next interview. And it was with a group called the Nature Conservancy, doing land deals. Anyway, I got the job. I worked there for 15 years, and then I got asked out to lunch by the CEO of WWF 20 years ago, and I've been there since. And I've been able to bring business and deal making and corporate sustainability to a lot of what we do. And I'm really glad that I have that background.
Now, when I first met you, we met actually through our daughters. This is, again, the power of relationships. And I remember, I think your daughter, Eliza, was maybe 8. I said, oh, what do your parents do? And she said, oh, my dad is with the WWF. And I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. He's a wrestler? So WWF has this incredible brand. It's one of the most recognized brands in the world, and you have one of the most recognized logos in the world. But actually, what the logo represents is a tiny part of what you do. So maybe tell us, what does the WWF, what do you do? What does the organization do, and what are your main priorities?
Yeah, I think it's funny how daughters connect people up, and I'm happy to know you. And you should hear what your daughter had to say about you, but that's for another day.
She's getting a lot of counseling these days, but yes.
I would just say, most people who see the panda logo and hear our name think we're nice people saving fuzzy animals. That is part of what we do, but it's not most of what we do. Most of what we do is about saving nature, is keeping nature intact in the world. And by nature, I mean the Brazilian Amazon, I mean the Mekong River, I mean the coral reefs of the Pacific and the rivers flowing out of the Himalayas that provide water to 3 billion people on Earth. That's what I mean, and we do it because those ecosystems are fundamental to stabilizing climate, fundamental for the provision of food, fundamental for safe drinking water, and fundamental for life on Earth. And so that is what we do, and we do that by looking at the whole of a place and thinking about what are the pressures on it. It could be climate change, it could be food production, it could be infrastructure design. And we work with all kinds of institutions to change the way we meet the needs of people to keep nature intact. And that's what we do, and it's super interesting, and I'm always learning.
And you've been leading I'm having a hard time with the WWF for 20 years. What would you say, these are the 2 or 3 things that you're most proud of, the most impactful changes that you've led, or changes in the habitat or protecting of nature?
First thing I would mention is we did a deal in Brazil starting 18 years ago that set aside 62 million hectares of land in the Amazon. That's equal to 1.5 Californias. That's pretty big. We then went on to build a financial mechanism, a multi-party single closing with a performance-based fund that pays out to the government if it keeps that intact year after year after year. That has worked through 5 different administrations in Brazil. 5 different administrations. That model of durability at scale we've now repeated in Colombia, in Peru, and Bhutan. We're negotiating that in 6 other countries, and we formed a partnership with the Nature Conservancy, the Pew Charitable Trust, the Walton family, some of the leading foundations in this country, to repeat that model in 30 countries around the world, and it's the biggest play in the world of conservation. And it emphasizes providing jobs for people in those places and communities where we create that model. So that's one. The second one is we have created an ongoing evolution of programs with companies, starting with certification programs for paper and seafood and aquaculture products. Think FSC, MSC. I bet your annual report is on FSC stock, which means it's paper that was produced sustainably. And we now have created something called the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is the gold standard for setting climate targets for corporations. And now we're working on voluntary carbon markets, voluntary markets for biodiversity certificates that drive money to really great projects on the ground. So that's 2. And the third thing is leadership, is just thinking about the next generation of leadership. We've created something honoring the guy who founded WWF in the United States, Russ Train, which has provided 3,700 scholarships to people in the developing world in the environment. And I'm now working on a program called Boundless for mid-career leaders across the Americas to learn to think of the whole of a place and to be experts in multidisciplinary approaches. So those would be the 3 things.
In your 20 years, these partnerships with companies have really developed. And I think when you started, probably partnering with a big company like Coca-Cola was controversial.
Yeah.
So why did you pursue these partnerships and what have they created?
Well, it's as I said at the beginning, I fundamentally think that for those of us in the environmental world, that we have to be brilliant at the business of the private sector, the way it works, the way money flows, the way company success is measured, and to harness the power of money, of the operations of companies around the world to keep the planet intact and to solve climate change. We have to do that. And for me, we do that with companies not on the basis of how much money they give us, but on the basis of the targets they set and a partnership we build in driving solutions. And the other thing about that is the more work we do that with companies, the more we establish a model of what a regulatory framework should look like that supports those kind of actions, not just for leading companies, but for companies that are laggards. And at the end of the day, it is that interplay between the private sector and government. And the last thing I would mention is communities on the ground so that they truly benefit. That is where the good stuff happens in our work.
That was like an advertisement for what we're doing here at COGOD in terms of teaching students the fundamentals of business, but then partnering with folks like Dana, who's a professor in our international school. She's a leader in advocacy and teaching people how to advocate for environmental progress. And so that combination is a great skill set. So this leads me to, I know you're a nonpartisan organization, but we're going from a period where perhaps the president has led the most ambitious, President Biden, and successful, bold climate initiative in the history of the US government, to a new president who, one of his transition officials said earlier this week, we no longer need to measure emissions. Don't worry about emissions anymore. So what does the new leadership in our country mean for your work, and how will WWF pivot?
I'm going to make a broader statement, which is this. Every country in the world is experiencing changes in government that are every bit as significant as the one that just happened. It just happened to happen in the United States. And what happens in the United States has consequences and ripple effects around the world. My colleagues around the world know more about our electoral college than we do. And they take notice of what happens here because our country is so influential, our economy is so influential, and our voice is so influential. And so I would just say, for us at WWF as a nonpartisan group, in every country where we work, we have to engage with both parties in this country. In some countries, it's engaging with many, many parties. We have to build programs that are durable between parties, that are supported by financial incentives, that are supported by the private sector, supported by civil society, that have durability, that don't just disappear overnight when a new head of state is elected. We are working very hard to build programs that create jobs in communities, because it turns out, in my experience, when you build a program that creates jobs in communities, in the case of our country, blue states, red states, in the case of other countries, the poorest parts of those countries, that confers a lot of durability because no new government wants to undo that. So those same principles hold true in this country for me. For our issue on nature, there is huge bipartisan support for clean air, clean water, forest protection, fisheries protection, and doing the right thing by local communities. Beyond that, we also work at a national but also a subnational level. We work with cities, we work with states, we work with all kinds of players, with native nations, and local communities. So at the end of the day, we need to hang on to those things we cherish the most. We need to harness bipartisan support for those things. And in the first Trump administration, there were several things that endured that we had created that were all about creating a level playing field on sustainability between our country and other countries. So we're going to drive toward those and drive toward the resilience of communities in the face of hurricanes, in the face of increased storm events, in the face of droughts, climate smart agriculture, so where farmers know what seeds to plant that will endure the droughts to come. We'll work hard on all of those things, including our ongoing corporate partnerships that set science-based targets and drive emissions down.
Speaking of science and speaking of interconnectedness, because of work that WWF and others have sponsored in science, we know the interconnectedness of our world, and your work in the Amazon of protecting that critical habitat helps people in Europe and Africa because of the flow of water and the science. What are the 2 or 3 most interesting or most kind of exciting scientific discoveries that are driving your work and that are changing the nature of your work today? Or example of one, maybe.
I was sorting through 10 in my mind, but thanks for cutting it down. 3 weeks ago, WWF, 4 weeks ago, we issued something called the Living Planet Report. It has tracked for 40 years the state of species on the planet. And we have lost 73% of the populations of vertebrates on the planet since we started measuring this. And freshwater species have declined by 85%, and the populations of species in Latin America by 95%. That depressing report then pivots to tipping points in the world. Some of them relate to climate change, some of them relate to deforestation, some of them relate to, and one of them is in the Amazon. In the Amazon, once we get below 80% of forest cover, the scientists generally, now it's 75 to 80, agree that the Amazon will turn into something else. It will start to turn into savanna. Savanna will not evaporate water in the same way. The water will not cycle in the same way. And the rainfall will not reach the crops in one of the most important sources of food in the world. So, you're going to lose a lot of species there once that happens. You're going to lose a lot of value for people, and you're going to lose a big source of food in the world. So the cascading effect is terrifying. So don't just think about the Amazon, it's the lungs of the planet. It's also the provision of, at the source of the provision of food to a significant part of the planet. That tipping point is interesting to me because not many people know about it. Mm-hmm. And it is at the intersection of climate and nature. And I think that's one of the most interesting parts of our work, is that climate change and nature loss are wound up like 2 strands of a helix. You can't solve one, you can't save one without solving the other. And it's true in a reciprocal way.
One of the other things that we're focused on at KOGOD is AI, really infusing AI in our curriculum, and also identifying the links between sustainability and AI, and how AI can be a tool to create more sustainable outcomes, but it's also a risk in terms of energy. What are your thoughts on the potential of AI and some of the risks as well for your work?
When I first got this job, I spent a lot of time in Palo Alto, mostly thinking that I was going to raise a lot of money there. And we did, thankfully. But I was also schooled that when you go to Palo Alto, don't go with the goal of raising money. You should go with the goal of throwing problems on the table with all the engineers who were there and ask for their help in solving the problems. And so we've worked with Google, we've worked with Facebook, we worked with Apple, we worked with all these companies in coming up with solutions, machine learning, using social media to control trade and advertising on ivory and tiger bones and things like that. And we have been using AI for a long time on monitoring of species deciphering the tracks of tigers and down to the individuals, understanding illegal trade. And so for us, AI is not the boogeyman under the bed per se, but the energy demands of AI, we have yet to see a credible plan to address that issue because it's huge. It's going to send us several steps backwards in the fight to stabilize our climate. And I heard somebody quoted when asked, what's your plan on that? And the answer was, AI will come up with the plan. But we need to have a plan, and we need to engage those companies. And it needs to be around a full accounting of the costs of AI and what's required to really go into it. And we need a regulatory framework for that. And that may prove to be very challenging.
One of the cool things about your job, I remember talking, like you'd say, oh, I'm going off to India to tag a tiger or going to Africa to tag a rhino. Like, tell us some of the coolest experiences where you kind of pinched yourself and said, how did I end up here?
I could pick from almost getting killed by a forest elephant in the midst of the Congo, but I could, and it is true that I collared a tiger in Nepal and drove him across the country, re-released him into the wild.
It was sedated when you collared it.
It was sedated.
Okay.
There was a moment where the Minister of Environment was screaming something behind me, and I asked, what's he screaming? And the guy next to me said, he's saying he's waking up.
Okay.
And, but there's so many to choose from. I think for me, it was a moment in the Sunda Sea in Indonesia where I'm on a wooden boat next to a volcano, bright red lava streaming down the side of the volcano, and I slip over the side and go scuba diving down, and there is the most extraordinary array of life, these amazing pipefish and nocturnal creatures in the ocean that you only dream of. And it is dark, and you're navigating by light, and then coming out of the darkness of that and breaking the waves and seeing a sky full of stars. Now, in what universe did I get to be in a place like that, having that kind of experience, as part of a team of people that is working hard to keep those coral reefs intact? How cool is that?
That's great.
So I regard this a huge gift to be doing what I'm doing. My dad said the secret to happiness was to serve something that's larger than you are and to be constantly learning. He left out family and friends, which I think also count, but to be constantly learning in the work that you do, I think and to be serving a larger cause is something that I feel incredibly privileged and happy to be doing that. And my sense is all of you, the reason you go to this school is because you're at the intersection of a great business school in a city that also exposes you to government. And you have the opportunity to create solutions in the world that are going to require you to get really smart about a lot of different areas and to come up and concoct new solutions. How cool is that?
Yeah, that's great. It's very inspiring. Florence mentioned that you were called Papa Carter by the Colombians. What's going on there?
I have no idea how many different forms of communications you guys each navigate. But for me and my phone, I got a lot going on at the same time. And particularly in the rest of the world. And I've learned WhatsApp is the go-to in international communications. And I had been trying to negotiate this deal with the government of Colombia, starting with President Santos, and then going on to President Duque. And it was all about that government setting aside a third of its ocean, a third of its terrestrial areas, indigenous lands, and indigenous marine systems, And in doing so with full financial backing, policy interventions, a tax on their carbon, a portion of their carbon tax, policy frameworks that keep this intact through changes in administrations. Very complex thing that involves, on the one hand, assembling money from 23 donors, on the other, working with 9 NGOs, and in the middle, all these closing conditions with the government. So it's a lot of different parts of your brain you're using. At the heart of this was a little negotiating group. The Minister of Environment, the lead on negotiations, the head of one of the world's largest foundations, the head of our local program, and me. And we kept trying to set up Zoom calls that didn't work, so I created my first WhatsApp group. I was very proud about that, because then I could press a button and it would call everybody immediately when an urgent issue came up. And it happened to be in the closing days of the administration, we headed toward closing, a lot of back and forth. And I'm in Switzerland, I'm in the Alps, I realize it's Father's Day. I take a picture of the Alps and I send it to my family. And I write them a note. I just want you to know on this Father's Day how proud I am of all of you and how much I love you. And I sent it to the Columbia group by mistake. And the minister writes back and says, yeah, I'm proud of this group too. And then I said, oh my God, I can't believe I sent it to the wrong group. And he writes back in Spanish and laughs and says, don't worry, Papa Carter, we all love you. And that stuck, and in the closing in the presidential palace, with all the donors, all the NGOs, I was introduced as Papa Carter. And it has stuck to this day. And I love the story mostly because at the end of the day in all of our work, all the systems analysis, all the financial markets, all of the lobbying, all of that, at the end of the day, a lot of it just comes down to human relationships. And having you treating each other as not in a formal way, but in the informal connections. And so that really carries you through when things get bumpy, is when there's that level of trust and humanity in the room. The other thing I would just say to you, if you're gonna really screw up who you send something to, just stick to your family, talk about how proud you are of them, make a mistake like the one I make, because other ones might be catastrophic. But it is, I think in every deal making, there has to be some level of goodwill, because inevitably things go wrong, and you've got to be able to ride through that.
I'm going to close with two requests for advice from you. First is for us as a school. So, we're pushing the intersection of business, sustainability, AI, entrepreneurship, and then we work with the other schools at AU, School of International Affairs, our School of Policy, because all of this is linked and interdisciplinary. The day after the election, I wrote a note to our faculty and staff, and I basically said our work today is more important than it was yesterday. Because if you want to create a more sustainable world at this moment in time, through business and nonprofits is going to probably be more productive than through the US government. And if you want to lift people out of poverty, investments is probably the way to go. So what advice do you have for us, given this moment in time and given your field of work?
Well, first of all, the world is changing around us. It's not just in the US, it's in every country in the world. There's a resetting of things, and you are in the middle of a bit of a roiling boil, which try saying that 10 times fast. And navigating change is a fundamental skill set that I think everybody needs to have. It means if you are going to be creating solutions that endure, make sure it works not just for one party, but for two parties, or if you happen to live in Nepal, there are many more besides. It means acquiring a multidisciplinary approach to everything you do. In moments like this and so much change, you need a diversity of partners, a diversity of sources of money, a diversity of beneficiaries in what you do. And so just acquire the ability to do that. My heroes in this work are people who had worked in government, had worked in civil society, had worked in business. And some of them also work in academia. They teach too. And so I would just say, acquire the ability to connect the dots between all those sectors, to bring them into a room to concoct solutions, and then to create solutions that you're not just looking for a quick win, you're looking for something that endures. I would say that. The other thing I would say is you need to find, I don't really like it when people tell me I need to do things, so I'll just rephrase. The best advice I ever got from anybody when I was going through challenging moments in my life, like being investigated by a certain administration or in a government inquiry or hearings, the best advice I got was 2 words, and it was from a noted senator who just knew what I was going through and sent me an email, and it had 2 words, and the 2 words were chin up. And what I liked about that is it was all about how you carry yourself through change, with confidence, with inquiry, the ability to listen to different points of view, and to keep your chin up and to maintain your bearings and to signal confidence and optimism about what you're going to accomplish and who you're going to do it with, and to carry through moments of change, because we work in 100 countries around the world. Our finest programs have been able to create, in the middle of government situations, earthquakes, rebellions, all kinds of moments of civil war and strife, the ability to get things done. And so I would just wish for all of you to having that curiosity about the world and different points of view, because at the end of the day, I think, at least for us, we do not exist in a black and white world. We live in a world full of all kinds of shades of gray. And our work is about affecting transitions, moving institutions in the right direction. And you can't do that unless you listen to different points of view and you figure out powerful incentives and solutions that move people in the right direction. Maybe not immediately, but over time in the right direction. So that would be my advice. Oh, don't forget to laugh. Do not forget to laugh. There is always, laughter is powerful. And don't forget to laugh in whatever situation you happen to be in. It changes the ions in a room.
Let's open it up to students, staff, faculty. Just introduce yourself and raise your hand. And we have maybe have some questions online as well. So who wants to start? Go ahead in the back.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Vidita. I'm a student in sustainability management. So one thing we are learning about sustainability is like the resiliency. And sustainability is there's so much to cope up, there's so much to process. And you partly answer, like you have to chin up. But there are projects which are like baby to you, like there is larger good, people are getting benefit of that. But it may not go. So how can you let go that baby projects that you have made and then chin up again and like build the resiliency, like do in the organization as well, because a lot of people have given blood and sweat to that project, but you'll need to let go.
Yeah, that's a great question. How do you learn to let go of projects you've invested your time, energy, love into? And there is something that happens in the environmental movement, which is people create solutions. They fall in love with their solutions, and they see the world through their solution. And it's almost like holding a hammer in your hand, and the world is full of nails. And when the world changes, you just hang on to that thing, and it is no longer the thing that's going to work. And the one thing I would just say is beware of falling in love with the tool you've created. And have the ability to sit in either the community, the place, the problem you're trying to solve, and to look at what is really needed. And it may not even be what you do or who you are. It may be bigger than you. And I think let me just step back. I just wrote a piece recently about momentum. And momentum in organizations or in institutions, you either have it or you don't. And when you don't, the warning signs are all around. And when you do, you can see it. And you see it in the churn of ideas, the launching of new things, and also the dropping of old things. You see it. Momentum is built on an engine of creativity, but also the ability to let go of things where what you have done in the past is no longer what works in this moment right now. And I love the Himalayas, spent a lot of time there, and the cultures I'm trying to write about this one part of the Himalayas, and where Shiva is one of the most beloved deities. And Shiva is associated as a god of destruction. Shiva is a lot more than that. But fundamental to why Shiva is constantly present is without destruction, there is not creation. And it is part of this cycle of life. And so sorry to go really deep and answer to your question, but it is something that we need to acquire now I'm going to shapeshift to a different faith-based tradition, which is Buddhism. Some of my Buddhist friends that said the beginning of suffering is attachment. So the ability to remain on the balls of your feet, to be able to let go of things, to pivot when circumstances change, to run to the light, and to make the best of a world that is imperfect, I think is fundamental. And letting go is part of that. And I'm in the middle of several conversations right now in my organization where one of the options is to let go. And it's hard, but it's also necessary.
Very good. You didn't know you were going to learn about Shiva, but...
And for those of you who really know all about Shiva, and I've completely misstepped, please correct me after
I think
I'm off the stage.
Professor Kopman had a question, and then who?
I'm Dan Kopman, I lecturer here. Thank you for joining us. 2 questions. The first is specific, and it relates to methodology and measures for sustainable agriculture. So by the end of the decade, the UN has said they will set a target, or they'll name the number of the proportion of agricultural land under sustainable agriculture practices. But to do that, they have to agree measures and methodology. Right now, it appears those 3 are around nitrogen use, water, and greenhouse gas emissions. Is that something you're engaged in and watching? Second question is more general. In our lifetime, my lifetime, 60 years, the population has grown from 3 billion to 8 billion. That appears to be dramatically changing the rate of growth. And many countries are projected to lose dramatic amounts of population by the end of the century. I saw a number where China's population will go from 1.4 billion to 700 million by the end of the century. Is the trends in population growth, or what appears to be a leveling off or possibly reduction in population, is that on your radar screen as well? Thank you.
Do you ask questions like that of your students on a regular basis?
I'm sitting next to one, and he has heard me ramble on about everything from fertilizer to population all semester. He's probably pretty sick of it, but
Okay.
But he's the son of a rice farmer, so he's also interested.
Okay, thank you.
As far as you know.
I would answer your first question. The measurement of sustainable agricultural production, both in terms of hectares, but also what comprises sustainability, is an ongoing, active part of the conversation within WWF. A huge part of our work is about food. The reason it is about food is when we look at the places we cherish in the world, the leading cause of habitat conversion is food production, or I would say unsustainable food production. And so sorting this out, not only what's the scale of change we need to see, but also what are the indicators, what are the measures, is very much a part of the work of our science program right now. I would throw one more in there about sustainability. Sustainability in any place also rests heavily on making transitions. And now I'm going to introduce a word to transitions, which is just transitions. And so it is profoundly important, in addition to the measures that you've laid out, is to measure what is the impact on communities and their rights and their livelihoods and their benefits that they get from new forms of production when you move to sustainability. And so we're adding in that fourth context into whatever we look at, and it's a trenchant question. That's the biggest word I'm going to use today, because we are wrestling with what's the right goal, what are the right indicators, and how do we get after that? Your second question was population. I am on the board of a foundation that has done a deep dive into the issue of toxicity and the impact that toxicity has on human reproduction. And some of the projections on human reproduction are shocking. And the changes that are predicted in different parts of the world, where the workforce will be hollowed out, the populations will decline at a rate that is destabilizing. And 20 years ago, WWF had a huge program on toxicity. Think Rachel Carson, think think Rachel Carson, think about the Persistent Organic Pollutants Treaty in Europe. That was a huge part of our work. And we thought the problem was relatively solved. Well, the problem on toxicity is not solved. One aspect of it is the slurry of plastics in the ocean and how it is now part of a lot of the seafood that we eat. And there is an embedded toxicity in that we're just beginning to understand. And so my prediction is there's going to be an explosion of interest in toxicity from the perspective of human health that will have, one of the big consequences of it may be a significant precipitous decline in population in different parts of the world.
Just to follow up, one of the biggest factors in diminution of our environment has been population growth, particularly in China, India, even the United States, with development of, clear cutting of trees as we develop agriculture. So on the one hand, slower growth in population could have environmental benefits. On the other hand, it reduces quality of life, reduces growth, reduces economic improvement. So it's two-edged sword in some ways, right?
This is a freighted conversation. Some people talk in the environment about steady state, kind of when everything's in balance. It's this little factoid just popped into my brain. Rhinos. If rhinos are brought together and they have a crowded population, they actually stop reproducing. They have a built-in kind of governor, if you will, in how they reproduce. People don't necessarily have that. WWF is not a population organization. I can point you to some that are great: Population Action International, Population Services International. It's not what we work on, but it is population growth, either and population crash are two huge issues in the world, as is the amount that populations consume, and they demand, and they waste. We tend to occupy the consume, demand, and waste part more than the population growth side of the equation. But it is, there's no question that there's a fixed carrying capacity of the planet. We are way past the carrying capacity of the planet now. Something's got to give. The things we're working on have more to do with using less land, energy, and water in producing food and getting after food waste in a significant way. I think that broader conversation is one that's best left to a long, long dinner.
Okay. Maybe one more question. I want to see if Professor Fisher has, we have one online, and then want to see if Professor Fisher has, maybe not, but.
Yeah, so we have an online question about whether and how climate policies like 2022's IRA will be affected by the change in political leadership in the US. And can you talk about the business impacts you can foresee from any such policy changes?
My youngest son graduated from college and now works for Jigger Shaw in the heart of the loans program of the Department of Energy as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. This is a constant topic of discussion at our dinner table tonight. I can't make predictions about the future. I could, but I don't want to. What I would just say is that program has delivered an unprecedented amount of money to the transition to renewable energy in our country, not by picking one solution, but by financing many, and doing so in a way that's creating jobs. And it epitomizes when I talk about solutions that benefit blue states, red states, solutions that benefit all kinds of people, that create jobs in many, many different ways and create durability and sustainability in a society. It is a juggernaut of that kind of solution. And I really hope that based on that job creation and where jobs are being created, that as much of that program can remain intact as it can, because I think it's fundamental to our country's ability to deliver against climate change and create jobs of the future.
I think one of these loan programs actually helped Elon Musk start some of his companies.
No, I don't doubt that.
Okay, so.
But I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Well, hopefully there will be some progress and some continuity. Last question, Professor Fisher? And maybe just introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dana Fisher. I am the director of the Center for Environment, Community, and Equity here, and I'm a professor in the School of International Service. Thank you so much for your
And we do a lot together, which is great.
We do.
Yeah.
We're buds. And one day we're going to go on a bike ride.
Okay, that'd be great.
Anyway, so I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how you see green groups in the United States helping to lead in efforts to build community resilience here. WWF has an amazing history of doing this kind of work abroad.
Yeah.
And whatever happens in the next 4 years, there's no question that our communities are going to need more capacity for adaptation and resilience because climate shocks are going to continue. And I'm curious if WWF has started to think about working with some other, NGOs here in DC or in the United States, and if you have any vision for how that might work out.
Thank you. This is a really important topic. For many years, resilience and adaptation was something parts of our environmental community didn't want to talk about. But it was interpreted as raising the white flag, and change is all around us now, and it's getting more fierce. We are very much a place-based organization. And one of my words of advice to my staff and our teams around the world is when the world is becoming really disrupted, is to stay focused and planted in the reality of place and the reality of communities, because that is at the heart of our work. And for that, you know, that has to do with food, it has to do with infrastructure, it has to do with their rights, it has to do with building new business models that keep nature intact. But it also has to do with building resilience. And we funded a project in Pakistan after the floods that brought in $65 million from the Green Climate Fund, $8 million from Coca-Cola, $7 million from USAID, and a bunch of money that we had internally. And to restore nature along river systems to absorb the impact of flooding. And it's awesome. And I think we should be doing that more and more in many, many parts of the world, including here in the United States. Where our feet are planted here in the United States is in two places that is globally significant. The Northern Great Plains, where we work with ranchers and native nations, and in Alaska. And there are other groups that are much more present in every little corner of the United States. But those are two parts of this country that we are really devoted to, that are going to see a lot of change. And so we're going to go deep with them on resilience. All the different Alaska native nations, and the Northern Great Plains. I love that work. And we will work with local groups and local communities. And we'll work with ranchers, and we'll work with all kinds of entities in making that happen. And I think this is one of the parts of the whole climate debate that people focus on new inventions, new technologies. But one of the most powerful things is nature itself in keeping communities intact, whether it's mangroves and tsunamis, or whether it's the banks of rivers. And I love the solutions in getting after that. So I wish we could do more across the U.S., but that's where we're really planted.
Well, Papa Carter, this has been a trenchant conversation. And in the spirit of Shiva, I want to thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, buddy. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Don't ever pat your host on the microphone.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you.